What's up guys, welcome back. My name is Raymie with Sew Yeah Quilting, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this awesome layer cake dream house quilt. Now, for the one behind me, we've used the Malibu Barbie collection, and during this tutorial we're going to be using the Cat's Meow collection, both by Riley Blake Designs. So let's jump right into it. Now, as we said previously, this quilt can be done with a layer cake. So that's where your house fabric, roof fabric, tree fabric, that's where all that's going to come from, is from your layer cake. And you're going to need your two solids for the door as well as for your background. Now, the cutting instructions for this are pretty simple. What you're going to do is cut an 8 3/4 by 4.5 inch strip here, and two 3.5 by 4.5 inch strips here. Now this is going to be the top of your house as well as the walls. Next, you're going to be cutting the roof. Now this is done by taking one piece of your layer cake and cutting it down by 1.5 inches to an 8.5 inch square. Then you're going to cut it on the diagonal to create your rooftop. Moving on to the door, this one here is a pretty simple piece, just a 2 3/4 by 4.5 inch strip. This can be done in any of your desired solids or pattern, whatever you decide to use. So moving on to the background fabric, as you can see, I've laid it out in kind of steps here. So you're going to take your 6 3/4 inch squares and cut them on the diagonal in order to create the sides of your flying geese block that we'll be using for the roof. Next, you're going to cut your two 1 3/4 by 8 3/4 rectangles. This is going to be that background fabric on the sides of your house. So now that we've gone over all of the cutting instructions, let's move on to actually sewing this block together. We're going to get started with our roof piece here, which, like I previously mentioned, is actually a flying geese block. Now, what you're going to do is take your background fabric and lay it on top, right sides together, of your triangle. Now, this is that piece that was cut down from the 8.5 inch square. So we're going to lay it on the first side and take it over to our sewing machine and give it that nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now that we have that first piece sewn, we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So take your background fabric and lay it down, right sides together across that other edge. So now that we have both of our edges done, we're going to go ahead and press and trim it down to a 6 by 12 inch rectangle. Now moving on to the actual structure of our house, we're going to sew our two wall pieces to the door just on the vertical line here. Now that I've got my first side done, I just want to remind everyone that if you're using a directional fabric, make sure that it doesn't get all wonky when you're stitching it. So for the houses here, I want to keep this one upright, because if I get it turned around, it's going to be really awkward with those upside down houses. Now I've gone ahead, sewn both sides, and pressed on my seams. And now we're going to be moving on to the second floor of the dream house. So get out your little rectangle here, and remember, keep your fabric directional. So we're going to lay it down right sides together on top of our walls and roof, and go ahead and stitch it up. Now that we have our house structure put together, we're going to sew our strips of background fabric to the side of the building. So just lay them here and sew your 1/4 inch seams. Now that we've gone ahead and sewn and pressed all of our seams, we're now going to take the piece that we had earlier of our roof and sew it to the actual body of our house. Our whole block is now complete, and we're going to go ahead and trim it down to 11.5 by 14 inches. Now that we have our completed house block, we're going to move on to the cutting instructions for our tree. Now I've laid out my layer cake piece like we did previously, and that is going to be cut down into an 8-inch square, not to be confused with the 8.5-inch square that we did previously. Now we're going to move on to cutting the trunk of our tree. Now that is going to be a 2.5 by 6.5 inch rectangle for that tree trunk, like I said. Moving on to our background fabric, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. So we're going to have 4 2.5-inch squares, 2 3.25 by 6.5-inch rectangles, and 2 2.5 by 14-inch strips. Now for the construction of the tree, all we're going to do is lay our white squares right sides together with our big 8-inch square, and we're going to be sewing on a diagonal line to create the tree top. Now we're going to do that on all 4 corners, so I'll meet you back here. Now that we have all 4 of our corners sewn together, we're going to go ahead and trim up our edges. I've gone ahead and pressed out my seams, so now we have this finished tree top. We're going to jump right into the tree trunk and background pieces. We have our tree trunk and our 2 background strips. Now, all we're going to do for these is just sew 1/4 inch seam allowance down both sides. Now comes the fun part, the actual construction of our tree. Now, all you're gonna do is take your tree trunk piece here and lay it face down or right sides together on your tree top block, just like so. We'll go ahead and give that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll meet you back here. Our blocks are coming together so nicely, and now what we're gonna do is our side pieces of our background fabric. So, get out those long strips here, lay them down right sides together, give them a nice press and seam. All of my seams are done for my tree. I'm going to go ahead and get it pressed out. Our 2 blocks are now complete, and we're going to go ahead to the actual construction of our rows. Now, as you can see in the quilt behind me, we have a bunch of different variations on each of our rows. This is completely up to your creativity. So, let's see what you got. My quilt top is almost finished, so I'm going to sew my last piece of sashing on and then my final row. And just like that, you have finished your entire layer cake Dream House quilt top. Give yourself a round of applause. And don't forget that you can check out all of our layer cakes on SewYaQuilting.com or here in store. Now, my name is Raymie, teaching you how to sew like a pro. We'll see you next week here at Sew Yeah Quilting.